Hello, my name is Adelpha Lowell. At my sister's wedding, her perfect, white-laced, $80,000 fairy tale, she raised a glass in front of 500 guests and called me an ugly rat. And everyone clapped. They laughed like it was scripted, like I was part of the entertainment. But what they didn't know is that I paid for the wedding. Every glass of champagne, every flower petal, every smug smile, they were all funded by me. Why would a woman fund her own humiliation? That's the question, isn't it? I remember the smell of magnolias as I stepped out of the cab. Savannah had that warm, slightly damp air that makes the scent of flowers drift farther than you expect. The church-turned ballroom stood ahead of me, its brick walls and arched windows glowing gold in the late afternoon light. It was a little before 4 o'clock when I arrived, alone, holding a modest clutch bag. I'd chosen a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing that would make anyone say I was trying to upstage the bride. I'd promised myself not to give them another reason to whisper. Walking up the steps, I felt the marble under my shoes, cool and smooth. Inside, the place was breathtaking. Tall ceilings with chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls, long tables with white linens, everything arranged to perfection. My sister Callista always did love making a spectacle. She had a talent for creating the kind of party people would post about for weeks. I caught myself thinking, like I had so many times before, they always knew how to throw a beautiful party, just never for me. A hostess in black and white smiled politely, glanced at the list, and then waved me toward a corner table near the back. "You're on table 15, she said, almost apologetic. I didn't need to ask who else was seated there. The family friends, the second cousins I hardly knew, the people who always said, "Oh, you're Callista's sister. We've heard so much about you," and then quickly changed the subject. I sat down, smoothed my dress, and tried to take in the room without feeling small. My champagne glass sparkled under the chandelier, but my reflection in it looked tired. I'd worked a full week at the legal aid office before flying down. No one had offered to cover my ticket, but that wasn't new. They expected me to be there, and I came. I always came. As the clock crept toward 5, the MC took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin tonight's celebration, we'd like to introduce the family." Cheers rose up as each name was called. "Our loving parents, Marlene and Sylvester Lowell." The crowd clapped. My mother beamed. My father kissed her cheek. Next came my brother, our always supportive older brother, Jared Lowell. More applause, people whistling, Jared waving like a politician. I felt a small knot in my stomach. I had rehearsed how to smile, how to clap for everyone else. And last but not least, the MC paused, his smile curling. "Our quirky little sister, Adelpha. Yes, she's here too." Laughter rippled through the room like a breeze, polite at first, then a bit louder. Some guests turned to look at me as if I might stand up and perform a trick. I forced a smile, raised my glass slightly. Inside, I felt the sting. Quirky little sister had always been their polite way of saying, the one we don't quite know what to do with. I turned my eyes to my drink, watched a bubble rise to the surface. The sound of the applause faded into a dull ringing in my ears. My palms felt damp, but my face stayed still. Years of practice had taught me how to look calm while my chest tightened. Dinner began. Plates of salmon and asparagus were set before us. I picked at mine without tasting it. Callista and Thatcher made their rounds, stopping at tables, hugging relatives, posing for photos. When they reached mine, she gave me a quick air kiss on the cheek and moved on before I could say anything. Later, as the candles burned lower and people settled into their seats, Callista stood at the microphone again, holding a glass of champagne. Her dress shimmered like liquid silver. "Before we cut the cake," she said, "I want to thank some special people." She looked radiant, her voice sweet. "Thank you to my parents, who've been my rock, to Jared, my biggest cheerleader, and..." She turned toward me, eyes glinting with something I couldn't read. "To my dear sister Adelpha, our ugly little rat who somehow made it here despite all odds." The room burst into laughter, loud, open laughter this time. Some clapped, a few raised their glasses in a mocking toast. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like the floor had opened beneath me. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. The sound came at me like waves. Ha ha ha. Each one heavier than the last. I caught my mother's eyes across the table. She mouthed, "Don't make a scene." Jared raised his glass toward me, smirking. Someone snapped a photo. The flash burned into my vision. I didn't remember standing up. One moment I was seated, the next I was moving, my chair scraping the floor. My hands trembled, but I kept them low, pressing the clutch to my chest as if it were armor. I murmured, "Excuse me," to no one in particular, and made my way toward the side doors. The laughter still echoed behind me as the heavy door shut. Outside, the garden was quiet except for the hum of crickets. String lights twinkled overhead. I walked past a fountain, its water catching the glow of the bulbs, and sat down on a stone bench. My hands were cold now. I stared at them, pale against the navy of my dress. They laughed, all of them, at me. I didn't say it aloud, but the words formed in my mind like stones, sinking in water. Every year, every birthday, every holiday where I'd been the afterthought, they'd condensed into that one moment, that single line from Callista's lips. Ugly little rat. I leaned back, looking up at the lights strung between the trees. Maybe I really was the rat in the walls, only noticed when I scurried too close. Only good for fixing the things no one else wanted to touch. The thought made my throat tighten, but no tears came. I sat still, feeling the night air on my face. Behind the ballroom windows, the music started again. Their laughter had moved on to something else. I sat there until the sky deepened, telling myself over and over to breathe. My heart slowed. My mind shifted from the sting to something steadier. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd keep swallowing it forever. But what they didn't know was, rats are survivors. I stayed on that stone bench longer than I meant to, my fingers tightening around the clutch like it was the only solid thing left. Through the ballroom windows, the lights glowed warm, and laughter swelled and dipped like the tide. They'd gone on without me, of course. They always did. I stood up slowly, brushed the gravel from my skirt, and inhaled. The scent of magnolias had dulled. Now there was the faint tang of spilled champagne drifting from an open side door. I straightened my shoulders and walked back toward the building, each step measured. If they were going to treat me like I didn't belong, then I would at least choose how I carried myself. Inside, the noise was a low roar. My mother spotted me from across the room and waved 2 fingers, a small, sharp motion, toward an empty chair near a pillar far from the stage. "Sit there," she mouthed, "away from the cameras. Even the seat they saved for me had a message. Stay small. Stay unseen." I took the chair anyway, smoothed my dress, and folded my hands in my lap. My eyes followed Callista and Thatcher as they moved among the tables, laughing with guests, hugging people like they were running for office. The MC announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could all take our seats for the bride's thank you speech." A hush fell. Glasses clinked. Callista stood at the microphone, glowing under the chandeliers. "Tonight isn't just about us," she began, her voice a practiced blend of warmth and self-satisfaction. "It's about the people who shaped me, made me strong, and taught me what love really is." She started naming names: our parents, Jared, her college roommate who once loaned her $20 for gas, even a former dance coach from middle school. Each mention drew applause, each name a little performance of gratitude. I waited. My heart beat steady, slow. Any second now she'd mention me. She had to. I'd been there for her through every exam, every late-night phone call, every time she needed a bill paid quietly. But she moved on to her next line, lifting her glass. "We couldn't be here without all of you," she said, and smiled, the smile that always looked genuine in photos, but felt like a blade up close. There was no mention of me. Not one word. My father leaned over, his voice low, like he was offering advice to a child about to cry. "Sweetheart, it's not personal. Just not the time." His hand patted the table once and withdrew. Not the time. It had never been the time. A server refilled my water glass. I murmured, "Thank you," and watched the condensation slide down the stem. My name absent from her lips felt heavier than any insult. The silence around my existence was louder than the applause for everyone else. Then the gifts. Callista clasped Thatcher's hand and announced, "We want to thank everyone for contributing to our honeymoon fund. It's been such a generous outpouring of love from our friends and family." A guest at a nearby table raised his glass and called out, "The older siblings really outdid themselves." Laughter. More clapping. I kept my face still. I had contributed 65% of that fund. I had made the single largest transfer. I'd even included a note asking for my name to be on the card with everyone else's. When I glanced at the display table earlier, my name was nowhere, just Jared's, my parents, and a handful of friends. It wasn't an accident. They'd made me invisible by design. I leaned toward my mother. "Why is my name not on the card?" My voice was quiet, steady, but my pulse thudded in my ears. She didn't look at me. "It's better this way," she whispered. "Don't make waves." Don't make waves. I had heard that phrase so many times growing up, it might as well have been our family motto. I sat back, my hands folding tighter in my lap until my knuckles whitened. The applause for Jared's generosity still echoed around us. My mother kept her eyes on her napkin. Across the room, Callista laughed at something Thatcher whispered. The lights glinted off her earrings like tiny mirrors. Slowly, I reached into my clutch. My fingers found the folded paper inside, the printed receipt of my transfer for the honeymoon fund. I unfolded it just enough to see my name, the amount, the date, proof. Then I folded it back and slid it away. I wasn't going to wave it around for validation. Not tonight. Not anymore. They took my silence as weakness, I thought, my gaze fixed on the stage. But I was recording every moment. Each slight, each omission, each insult. They thought it would vanish because I swallowed it. They didn't see the quiet ledger I'd been keeping in my mind for years. As the speeches moved on, the clinking of forks and glasses blended into a dull hum. My focus shifted inward, my anger cooling into something sharper. I no longer wanted their acknowledgement. I wanted clarity. I wanted to understand just how far they were willing to go to erase me and how much proof I'd need to show the world what they were. Callista finished her speech with a flourish. "Here's to family," she cried. Everyone raised their glasses. I touched mine but didn't lift it. My father clinked with someone across the table. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin like she'd just heard something beautiful. I sat still, my hands now relaxed on the tablecloth. My mind was no longer on the party, or the guests, or even the insult. It was on the quiet folder in my purse and on all the other receipts, emails, messages, checks, that told a story no one else wanted to hear. When dessert was served, I stood up softly, making no sound with the chair. This time, no one looked at me. The cameras were focused on Callista cutting the cake. I walked out again, my steps even. In the hall, the noise dulled to a distant echo. I paused by a window, looking out at the garden where I'd sat earlier. The same string lights hung there, still glowing. My reflection in the glass looked different now, calmer but edged. My silence wasn't surrender anymore. It was preparation. I pressed my clutch tighter under my arm and whispered to myself, "And some records are meant to be released." The music from the ballroom spilled faintly into the hallway as I walked past the gilded mirrors. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor, each sound steady, deliberate. I didn't head straight to my hotel room. Instead, I let myself drift to the small lounge near the cocktail bar, where guests were gathering before the next round of speeches. The scent of perfume and expensive liquor hung in the air. I slipped into a shadowed corner, clutch still under my arm, and tried to disappear into the wallpaper. That's when a woman in a sequined dress, holding a martini, turned to me with a tipsy smile. "You're the one from the high school scandal, right?" she asked brightly, like she was talking about a celebrity sighting. "Callista told us how you almost ruined your family's name back then." The words landed heavy. High school scandal. Almost ruined the family's name. That wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a story my sister had told them, a story that never happened. I could almost feel the gymnasium floor under my feet again, the smell of cheap punch, the way she'd cornered me after the charity event and hissed that I'd embarrassed her. Years later, she was still spreading that version. They didn't just forget me, I thought. They rewrote me into a villain. I smiled faintly at the woman, the kind of smile you give a stranger who steps on your foot in the subway. That's not exactly how it happened, I said softly. She blinked, confused, then turned back to her drink, already losing interest. The damage was done. The whisper game had worked. A rumor told often enough becomes a biography. Across the lounge, near the fireplace, I saw my mother leaning in close to Aunt Helen. Their heads tilted together, their faces open in the kind of intimacy reserved for gossip. I moved slightly closer, just enough to hear. "Well, we had to distance ourselves from her then," my mother said in a low voice that still carried. "We couldn't risk Callista's image, not with everything she was trying to build." My aunt nodded, murmuring agreement. My mother chuckled softly, as if they were remembering a small inconvenience rather than my life. The sound cut deeper than any insult. It wasn't neglect, it wasn't forgetfulness. It was calculated. Erasure. I turned away before they could see me. The lounge was too warm suddenly, the scent of perfume too sweet. I walked toward the exit, my head high. Outside, the evening had deepened into full night, the string lights in the garden now glowing like constellations. Guests drifted past, laughing, unaware of me. By the time I reached my hotel room upstairs, my body felt like it was running on autopilot. I closed the door gently, set my clutch on the desk, and exhaled. The quiet hit me like cool water. I slipped off my shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened my laptop. On the screen, a folder blinked back at me. Personal. Inside, another folder. Receipts. And inside that, a video file labeled with a date from more than 20 years ago. I clicked it. The screen lit up with grainy footage. Two little girls under one blanket, a flashlight flickering between them. Callista and me, maybe 8 and 10 years old, whispering secrets like only sisters can. My voice on the tape. "If you get famous one day, will you tell everyone your sister made you?" Her voice, small and sure. "And if they forget you?" I asked. "I won't let them," she answered, giggling, brushing my arm. The sound was so familiar, it hurt. Now, watching from a hotel bed miles and decades away, I whispered back to the screen, "You let them." My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. The girl on the screen still believed in promises. The woman watching knew better. I paused the video, the image frozen on our two faces lit by flashlight. I reached for an external drive from my bag, plugged it in, and began copying the file. The little progress bar crept across the screen. While it moved, I opened the folder labeled Receipts again. Bank transfers, email chains, text screenshots, years of my quiet ledger, proof that I wasn't imagining any of it. They erased me from the story, I thought. Time to write my own chapter. The copy finished. I ejected the drive and slipped it into the inner pocket of my bag. My hands moved calmly, without shaking. I looked at the frozen frame again. 2 sisters, 1 promise. I closed the laptop, sat back against the headboard, and stared at the ceiling. The night outside was quiet now. The distant thump of music from the ballroom had faded. My heart felt steady, no longer the quick, shallow beats of humiliation. It was slower, heavier. Not rage, not despair. Something colder, more deliberate. Before you change the ending, you have to confront the plot twist no one saw coming. I didn't sleep much after that night in the hotel room. Even with the curtains drawn and the hum of the air conditioner, my mind kept circling back to every line of that old video, to every bank statement and ignored message I'd saved. Before you can change the ending, you have to confront the plot twist no one saw coming. That thought stayed with me through the flight back to Atlanta, through the quiet week at work, and through the days leading up to the wedding. 1 week before the ceremony, I sat at my kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling in my hand. My phone lay in front of me, open to a message thread with Callista. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Then I typed, "You've changed. I know you want this to be perfect, but please don't forget who helped raise you. And be careful with Thatcher. He reminds me too much of Dad, in all the wrong ways." I read it twice, feeling the weight of each word. I didn't want it to sound like an accusation. I wanted it to sound like a bridge. My sister still had a chance to be decent, I told myself. She still had a chance to remember. I pressed send. The little check mark appeared, then the word read. And then, nothing. Hours passed, days passed, no reply. The silence on my screen felt like a door closing. By the time the wedding day arrived, my hope had shrunk into something small and hard. I dressed carefully, putting on the navy dress again, my hair smooth and simple. The church-turned ballroom glowed with lights and flowers, the air humming with anticipation. I tried to move as if I belonged there, even as I felt the weight of the ignored message sitting like a stone in my chest. Later, after the dinner and the speeches, when most guests had moved to the cocktail area, I passed near the open bar on my way to the restroom. Voices drifted from a cluster of groomsmen. Thatcher's laugh rose above them, confident, a little too loud. "Her sister?" he was saying. "I swear, having her around makes this whole event feel like charity work." Laughter rippled through the group. He chuckled again. "She looks like she's always one step away from asking for a handout. Poor thing." My stomach clenched, but I kept walking, my expression calm. Then, in the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Sylvester, Thatcher's mentor, an investor in his new company, standing just behind the groomsmen. His glass paused mid-air. He didn't say a word, but his face had gone still, his eyes fixed on Thatcher. He had heard every word. I went into the restroom, washed my hands slowly, and looked at my reflection. My face looked calm, but my heartbeat thudded in my ears. The insult itself wasn't new. What was new was that someone else had finally heard it, someone who mattered to Thatcher. When I came back out, the group had dispersed. Sylvester was at the far end of the bar, swirling his drink. As I passed, he looked up and caught my gaze. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he set his glass down and walked over. "Some people mistake being loud for being right," he said quietly, leaning close enough that only I could hear. "Stay quiet, but stay ready." I met his eyes. "That's exactly what I intend to do," I said. My voice was steady. His expression flickered, approval maybe, and then he turned back to his drink. I slipped away to a quieter part of the building, near the coat room. My phone buzzed softly in my bag. I pulled it out. No new messages from Callista. No apology. No acknowledgement of the warning I'd sent. Just silence. I opened my email instead, attached the voice memo I'd quietly recorded of Thatcher's remark, along with a screenshot of my read but ignored message, and forwarded them to a private email I'd created months ago. Failsafe @ProtonMail. They've had their say, I thought as my thumb hovered over the send button. Now it's my turn to start writing mine. I hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving felt like a small exhale of something I'd been holding too long. Outside the window, the garden lights glowed softly, the night air moving the branches of the trees. Inside, the party roared on. But somewhere in the cracks of that perfect evening, the first tremor had started, and when the warning is ignored, consequences don't knock. They kick in the door. By the time I returned to the reception hall, the energy had shifted into a kind of giddy chaos. People were moving freely now, wine glasses clinking louder, the scent of overcooked shrimp lingering beneath the floral centerpieces. Someone had dimmed the chandeliers just enough for the corners of the ballroom to blur, turning into vague gold halos around the tables. I stood near the kitchen doors, away from the bustle. A few guests passed me by without a second glance, their conversations carrying phrases like, "Wasn't the dress just breathtaking?" and "They make such a power couple." The MC tapped his mic. "Before we head to the cake cutting," he said, "we've got someone who'd like to say a few words." Callista's best friend, Jenna, with her forced laugh and designer clutch, stepped up. Her voice poured into the mic with the sweetness of a woman who knew exactly what she was about to say and relished every word of it. "I've known Callista since college," she began. "And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that she's always been the strong one. She used to tell us all the time. She practically raised herself." The crowd tittered. Someone near the front let out a loud, "That's right," followed by applause. Jenna smiled wider. "Yep. She always said she grew up feeling like an only child. Just her dreams, and her hustle." The clapping grew louder. I felt it, not in my ears, but in my spine. That subtle, backhanded way they erased me again, not forgotten, replaced. It wasn't even Callista saying it this time. She'd outsourced the erasure. I stood there, still as stone, letting the applause wash over me like cold rain. I didn't cry, I didn't move. But inside, something cracked. Not like glass breaking, but like a rope giving way strand by strand. After the speech, while the servers began prepping for the next course, a young man in a catering uniform approached me. His white shirt was slightly untucked, and his apron had a faint sauce stain. He looked a little nervous. "Ma'am," he said, "are you part of the kitchen team?" I blinked, caught off guard. "One of the sisters said you'd be helping with table cleanup near the back." I stared at him. For a moment, I didn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I was stunned at how deeply they could still dig. "No," I said finally, my voice even. "But thank you." He nodded awkwardly and stepped back, looking embarrassed. I walked away slowly, my jaw tight, the heels of my shoes tapping out something close to fury across the polished floor. I didn't go far, just to the edge of the room, near the main hallway. From there, I watched Callista posing for photos, her dress flaring like a movie star's. Our mother hovered nearby, touching up her lipstick, laughing with someone from church. Jared, my brother, was at the bar, bragging about real estate. I waited until the photo flash faded. Then I walked up to my mother. She didn't see me at first, not until I was close enough to smell her perfume. Sweet, floral, familiar in a way that used to comfort me. "I hope this wedding was worth it," I said calmly. She turned, blinking. "Adelpha?" "Because I'm done playing polite." Her face changed, tightened. "Adelpha, don't be dramatic," she said in a rushed whisper. "You know Callista didn't mean it." "She meant every word," I replied. "And you clapped." She stared at me like she didn't understand the language I was speaking. But she did. She just didn't want to answer. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked away. Outside, the air had cooled. The night was softer than I remembered, or maybe I'd just stopped noticing. I walked across the gravel lot, past cars lined in crooked rows, until I reached mine. I didn't get in. I just stood by the door, looking up. The sky above Savannah didn't have many stars, not with all the lights from the ballroom and the street lamps, but I found a few. I leaned against the hood of my car and let the silence sink in. They kept calling me the outsider, the afterthought, the charity case. Let them. I was done asking to be let in. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was restless, but because I was ready. Somewhere between the bitter champagne and the fake smiles, something had shifted inside me. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't hoping they'd see me, include me, or remember what I gave up for them. I was done hoping. I had something stronger now. Clarity. The sun was just rising when I opened my laptop at the desk in my hotel room. The curtains were still closed, but the soft light slipped through the edges. The room was quiet except for the clicking of the keys under my fingers. I logged into the event vendor account, opened the contract folder, and pulled up the invoices. The subject line typed itself. Invoice reversal request, contract clause 4B. I attached every document, my wire transfers, receipts, email threads confirming I'd covered the venue, catering, decor, photography, all of it. Every dollar that had built the wedding they used to humiliate me. In the comment box, I typed just one sentence. Per breach of agreed-upon family terms, including public defamation, payment obligation is void under Clause 4B. I paused, reread it, and then hit send. Then I sent a separate message to the event coordinator, the venue manager, the catering head, and the entertainment lead, copying in my attorney. Effective immediately, halt all services pending financial clarification, I wrote. I added one line for good measure. Adelpha Lowell, financial sponsor of the event. It was just after 7:30 when I shut the laptop and picked up my phone. I had no missed calls, no texts, no emails from Callista, Mom, or Jared. Of course not. They only reached out when they needed something, and when I gave it, they made sure to act like it came from someone else. I took my time getting dressed, selecting a clean blazer and slacks instead of another cocktail dress. Today was not about pretending. Today was about reclaiming what had been stolen from me, piece by piece. By the time I arrived back at the venue for the wedding brunch, the parking lot was already packed. Cars lined both sides of the street, and a valet rushed toward me as I stepped out of my rental. I waved him off. "I won't be long," I said. Inside, the air was already thick with mimosa breath and the smell of reheated breakfast pastries. Guests filled the banquet hall, seated at round tables decorated with leftover centerpieces from the night before. Callista stood near the stage in a cream-wrapped dress, Thatcher beside her, smiling for photos. Her smile faltered just slightly when she saw me walk in, but only for a second. Then she turned back to her admirers like I was nothing more than another forgettable staffer. I didn't go to my assigned seat. I stood by the wall, near one of the wait staff who was adjusting a tray of glasses. He looked nervous. "We're getting a lot of questions," he murmured to another server. "What's going on?" I asked gently. He glanced at me, confused. "Payments. Some departments say they've been paused, and the kitchen just got told to stop service until further notice." "Sounds like someone should talk to management," I said with a small, knowing smile. Within minutes, I saw the first sign of unraveling. The band stopped mid-song. The music faded awkwardly, like a speaker losing power. Guests looked around. A few chuckled, assuming it was a technical glitch. Then a man in a navy suit stepped onto the stage. Venue manager, I recognized him from the initial meetings I attended alone. He cleared his throat into the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the interruption," he began, voice clipped but polite. "Due to an issue with unresolved financial transfers, several contracted services will be temporarily suspended until clarification is received. We appreciate your patience and understanding." The silence that followed was deafening. Whispers sparked instantly. Glasses were set down. People shifted in their chairs. One woman muttered, "What do you mean unpaid? This is a Lowell event." Another said, "Didn't the family plan this for months?" I kept my back straight, hands in my pockets. I didn't blink. Callista rushed toward the stage, her voice high-pitched and tight. "Excuse me, this is a mistake. My family handled all of this." The manager nodded calmly. "I understand, ma'am, but the payment withdrawal came from the primary account holder." Callista turned toward the crowd, laughing nervously. "Okay, well, we'll get it sorted. Just a little hiccup, right?" But the staff had already begun closing the open bar. Servers whispered hurried instructions to one another. A few began removing plates from the kitchen before anything could be served. Guests started recording. Phones popped up around the room like periscopes. I saw one woman lean over to her husband and say, "Can you believe this? At a wedding brunch?" From my spot near the wall, I watched Callista's world tilt. Her posture stiffened. She looked around, searching for someone to fix it. Her eyes landed on me. For a brief moment, our gazes met across the room. She knew, and I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the silence do the talking. Thatcher stood frozen beside her, mouth slightly open, unsure whether to comfort her or step aside. He did neither. He just stood there, like he realized for the first time the foundation under his feet wasn't solid. I stepped back, turned, and walked through the rear exit toward the parking lot. The air outside was warmer now, the midday sun cutting through the breeze. I didn't need to look back to know what was happening in that room. The unraveling had begun. Quietly, efficiently, without screaming or spectacle. They invited me to watch them rise, I thought as I opened my car door. I stayed just long enough to see them fall. The Monday after the wedding weekend started like any other corporate morning in Atlanta. A gray sky, too many emails, traffic that crawled, but for one man, it would be anything but typical. Thatcher was seated at the head of the long conference table in his firm's downtown office. He wore a charcoal suit and a forced smile. Around him, his executive team shuffled papers, adjusted ties, tapped on tablets. The air was thick with anticipation. Today was the final negotiation for a merger he'd spent the last 6 months bragging about. This deal was supposed to be his legacy move, a step into the big leagues. The banking liaison arrived 10 minutes late, as they often do when they want to make sure you're reminded who's really holding the pen. He sat, opened his folder, and glanced at the documents Thatcher's team had provided. "Well," the man said, flipping through the pages, Before we proceed, we have a small issue. Thatcher's eyebrows lifted. Define small. The banker adjusted his glasses. One of your key holdings has triggered a compliance flag. It seems there's a majority silent partner whose profile is under review. There was a pause. Heads turned. Thatcher cleared his throat. That's impossible. I know every partner in that venture. The banker offered a thin smile and slid a paper across the table. One name, typed in bold, sat at the top of the page, Adelpha Lowell. For a long moment, Thatcher didn't react. Then he let out a sharp laugh, as if it were some bizarre clerical error. There must be a mistake. Adelpha's not... She's not involved in my business. The banker remained calm. She is, Mr. Graham. She's been involved for quite some time. Your documentation lists her trust as the majority financial contributor to the controlling shell company. Thatcher's color changed, first flushed, then pale. A junior associate whispered to him, "You said it was anonymous. You said she was just background." Thatcher stood abruptly, muttering something about needing clarity, and exited the room. No one followed him. By the time he pulled into Sylvester's driveway, the sky had darkened. The house stood silent, lights on inside. He didn't bother ringing the bell. He just walked in. Sylvester was seated at his study table, glasses low on his nose, reading the Wall Street Journal like it was just another quiet evening. He looked up as Thatcher stormed in. "You knew," Thatcher said. Sylvester folded the paper slowly. "I did. You let me humiliate her, let me marry into that family, sign those deals. With her pulling the strings, you sat there and said nothing." "I gave you a warning," Sylvester replied, his tone even. "More than once. But you were too busy performing to listen." Thatcher's voice cracked. "She sabotaged everything." "No," Sylvester corrected. "She invested." "And then you insulted her. In front of 500 people, you called her a rat." Thatcher's face contorted with something between rage and confusion. It was a joke. Not to her. There was silence, heavy, dense, like the moment before a thunderclap. "It was her all along," Thatcher whispered. Sylvester didn't answer. He didn't need to. Thatcher left without saying goodbye. That night, alone in his condo, Thatcher poured himself a drink and stared at the city skyline. He played back every interaction, every dismissive smirk, every time he'd waved off Adelpha's presence as irrelevant. What he'd thought was meekness had been precision. She hadn't fought him. She'd bought him, and he hadn't seen it coming. He picked up his phone and dialed Callista, straight to voicemail. He waited, then tried again. Nothing. He finally spoke. "You turned your biggest ally into your biggest threat," he said into the recording. "And now, you've lost her." We both did. Meanwhile, in my apartment across town, I sat in front of my laptop once more. A notification blinked from my firm's portal. It was a message from the compliance team. Subject line, Executive Action Request. Body. Would you like to proceed with removing the current executive team of Graham Industries? I stared at it for a moment. My finger hovered over the response button. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I typed, "Let them sit in uncertainty a little longer." I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. The city stretched below me, humming with movement, unaware that a single decision could shift so much weight. I looked out not with vengeance, but with clarity. I had waited. I had endured. I had documented everything. And now I had the leverage. Sometimes justice needs patience. And a witness. The invitation read, "Family-only dinner." Embossed cream cardstock, written in Marlene's faux elegant cursive font, as if the font itself could smooth over history. It was designed to look like reconciliation, a gesture, a reaching out. But I knew better. I always did. It wasn't healing. It was housekeeping. It wasn't a balm. It was a broom. The Lowells didn't apologize. They strategized. They didn't make amends. They made adjustments. Tight ones, quiet ones, staged like candlelight and folded napkins. This was damage control. It had always been damage control. So I arrived 10 minutes late. Not because I needed to make an entrance, not to be dramatic, but because I wanted every eye in that room to turn when I opened the door. And they did. The dining room had been transformed into something theatrical, as if grief and betrayal could be wiped away by gold-trimmed porcelain and flickering votives. The linen napkins were folded into impossible origami shapes. Crystal goblets sparkled under the warm chandelier light. Everything reeked of overcompensation. Callista sat at the head of the table, posture perfect, as if nothing had happened. Marlene and Sylvester flanked her like royal guards, their eyes carefully blank, their smiles brittle. Jared moved around the table pouring wine, too eager, too cheerful, like a man desperate to believe the story he was performing in. But no one looked relaxed. Every jaw was tight, every shoulder slightly hunched. They weren't waiting for the meal, they were waiting for me, and for once, they didn't know what I was going to do. That was new for them. I walked into the room slowly, deliberately. I didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't apologize for being late. I pulled out the chair closest to me, halfway, then thought better of it. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a thick manila folder on the center of the table. The air shifted. No one moved. No one spoke. I let the silence thicken before I spoke, my voice level and steady. "I didn't ruin your event," I said. "You did. I just stopped paying for the illusion." Then, calmly, deliberately, I opened the folder. One by one, I laid out the receipts. A breakdown of the catering invoice, with my name and bank information redacted but clear. A line item summary from the venue, time-stamped, paid by me. Floral charges, placed on my account. Screenshots of emails between Callista and her planner, where she misrepresented who was footing the bill. A copy of the wedding registry, the digital version, the one where my name had been scrubbed from the joint gift entirely. Then I slid the final piece forward, a small black USB stick with the word "Truth" scrawled across it in Sharpie. Callista broke the silence first. Her voice sliced through the tension like a paper cut. "You're unbelievable." Jared cleared his throat and shifted uncomfortably. "Adelpha, this isn't the place." I cut him off without raising my voice. "No?" I said. "Then what is the right place to address being erased by your own family?" Callista scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was throwing a tantrum over something as trivial as cake placement. "All this drama because you didn't get your name on a gift card?" And then, a sound I wasn't expecting, the sudden scrape of a chair. Thatcher stood. He reached into the pocket of his blazer and pulled something small, something that caught the light. His wedding ring. He placed it, gently but deliberately, on the polished table. "I don't want a wife who humiliates her own blood for applause," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Well, that's not strength, that's rot." Callista's head snapped toward him. Panic bloomed across her carefully made-up face. "Wait, what? You're serious?" But he didn't look at her. He looked at me. "You deserved better from all of us. And from me. I'm sorry, Adelpha." Then he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy but certain. The room splintered like glass. Callista lurched to her feet. Her voice lost its polish. "Why didn't you stop him?" she snapped at Marlene. "Why did you just sit there?" Marlene, for once, didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend. She didn't blame. She just said softly, "Because she was protecting us. From ourselves." And just like that, the air in the room collapsed in on itself. No one spoke. Not Jared. Not Sylvester. Not even Callista. The illusion cracked, and nothing could cover it. Callista sat back down slowly. Her lipstick was perfect, her hair immaculate, but her eyes were wild. "You let her ruin everything," she hissed, but no one corrected her. I gathered my folder, picked up the USB, slid them back into my bag. My hands were calm, my pulse steady. My heart was quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't sneer. I didn't say "I told you so." That was never the point. I turned toward the door. Sylvester stood slightly, maybe to stop me, maybe to offer some too-late platitude. But I lifted one hand without turning around. "Don't." And I left. The hallway smelled like lemon polish and old wood. I passed the gallery wall, the same one I'd passed since I was a child. Jared's graduation photo, Callista's pageant trophies, Marlene and Sylvester on their anniversary cruise. No pictures of me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't ache over that. Outside, the night air was warm, still. A few insects hummed in the hedges. The wind stirred the leaves, but didn't carry the past with it. I didn't rush to my car. I just stood on the porch for a minute. And now, let the silence settle. Winning isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just walking away, with no chain dragging at your ankle. The days after the dinner stretched out in slow motion, like steam rising from a cracked sidewalk after a sudden rain, soft, steady, unremarkable. There were no confrontations, no urgent phone calls, no dramatic unraveling. Just quiet. Callista didn't reach out. Not the next day, not the week after, not at all. A friend of hers, someone who had long drifted toward her circle, even when we were younger, mentioned it casually over coffee. She went dark, she said, scrolling through her phone. Blocked almost everyone, deleted all her wedding photos, nobody really knows what's going on. I nodded like I didn't care, like it was just another piece of gossip floating by. But later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my own phone. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe a notification. A missed call. A simple message saying, "I thought about you today." Something that hinted at reflection, at regret, at anything. But there was nothing. And strangely, the silence didn't hollow me out the way it used to. It didn't crush. It didn't sting. It was clear. Like a room finally emptied of stale air. I set the phone down gently and whispered to no one in particular. I wasn't expecting sorry, just acknowledgement. But it never came, so I stopped waiting. I turned my attention somewhere it might actually matter. A few weeks later, I started volunteering at the community center on the south end of town. Nothing flashy, just 2 evenings a week in the back room near the kitchen, the air thick with burnt coffee and the clatter of old folding chairs. I met with young women, some single mothers, some students, some survivors trying to piece their lives together after being broken too many times by systems that were never built for them. We sat in a circle of wobbly chairs, surrounded by chipped paint and laminated posters. Some of them had bruises, some wore defiance like a second skin, but all of them showed up, tired, eager, determined. I taught them what no one ever taught me: how to read a lease, how to understand a loan, how to build credit, protect it, and use it as a weapon in a world that used to use it against them. I showed them how to walk into rooms like they belonged, like they deserved to be heard. Sometimes I brought pastries. I'd leave them in the center of the table, and by the end of the session, only crumbs would remain. One night, a girl named Daniela looked at me as she took notes and said, "You talk like someone who's been through it." I smiled. Maybe I have. It wasn't about telling my story anymore. It was about helping someone else write theirs. I didn't need to be the headline. I just wanted to be the page they could start from. Some people build walls, others plant seeds. And when I was learning the difference. One Saturday afternoon, after a workshop had ended and the last of the women had shuffled out the door with folders and hope tucked under their arms, I wandered into a small bookstore nearby. It was quiet, dusty in a comforting way. There, between the financial planning guides and a self-help display about boundaries and forgiveness, was a single journal. Its leather cover was smooth and plain. No pattern, no flourish. Just one word embossed across the front. Unsent. I bought it. Paid in cash. That night, at my kitchen table, I lit a candle and opened to the first page. I didn't hesitate. I wrote, "Callista, I loved you more than you'll ever know. Maybe that's why it hurt so deeply. You weren't just my sister. You were my shadow, my mirror, my responsibility. And when you smiled while the room laughed at me, when you didn't flinch as I was cut down with jokes that landed like knives, something in me cracked. I don't think it'll ever be the same. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done bleeding for people who won't admit they held the knife." When I finished, I folded the page and slid it between the others. I didn't lock it away. I didn't press it with tears. I just let it sit there. Then, with slow and steady hands, I tore the page from the binding, walked to the sink, and held it above the flame. The paper curled, darkened, turned to ash. Not out of hate, not even for closure. Just release. A few days later, I went back to the garden behind the ballroom where everything had started. The place of the dinner, the betrayal, the beginning of the unraveling. The string lights were gone now. The roses had long since stopped blooming. The late autumn air smelled of cold soil and damp stone. Still, the bench was there. The same bench where I had first realized how deep the knife had gone. How deep it had always been, even before I'd had the language to name it. I sat down and wrapped my coat tighter around me, hands buried in my pockets. Across the lawn, a little girl was chasing a red balloon, laughing as it bobbed and weaved in the wind. She slipped on a muddy patch and landed square on her knees. Her coat was instantly soaked and stained. Her mother called out from a distance, "Watch the mud, sweetheart! Stay clean!" But the girl just looked up, grinned, and lifted her dirty hands to the sky like they were trophies. I chuckled under my breath and whispered, "It's okay to get messy. That's how we know we lived." And as I sat there, feet planted on the very ground where I'd once been mocked, dismissed, laughed at, I realized something. I didn't feel small anymore. They had laughed at me, called me the ugly rat, but I was never a rodent. I was the root. They just never realized who was feeding the ground they stood on. Now they know. And now, I'm finally dancing, alone, on my terms, no one else's rhythm. No one else's permission, just mine. Sometimes, silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. Adelpha's story reminds us that not every battle is fought out loud, and not every victory needs applause. When dignity is stripped away by those closest to us, reclaiming it quietly can be the loudest justice of all. Have you ever been the outsider in your own family? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-life revenge stories that reveal what happens when quiet people take back control.